Porsche. There is no substitute.
Fuck you.
Tablet here. Welcome back to the program. Lots to talk about. This is going to be kind of like the FJ Cruiser video that I posted a few weeks ago. I'll put a link up here somewhere where you can click on that. We've talked about this in the past. I've talked about it ad nauseum. But if you're out there shopping for a car, what are the cars to look for? What are the cars that are good buys? What are the ones that you can buy low, get them while they're cheap, not take a depreciation hit, and then hopefully maybe with any luck, hold your money or even increase the value of whatever asset you end up buying. And this is just another great example of it. Now let me just preface everything I'm about to say. You saw the intro, the Risky Business intro to the Porsche 928. Everything I'm about to say has a bit of speculation to it, okay? There's no guarantee with any of this, but you just got to look at the market forces and all that stuff and make an educated decision. But I picked out the 928 because I think it's just a really great opportunity out there to get a car at the right time. Get into it now. Don't wait. If you wait, you're not. It's going to be too late. You're going to buy it when it's too high. It's kind of like the E30 M3. You don't want to get into an E30 M3 now. It's too late. You wanted to get in 5 years ago. So that's just the preface. Let me just get out that disclaimer out of the way. So let's talk about just the 928 in general. What it is, where it came from, why it happened, and all that good stuff. Well, a little bit of background. By the way, if I misspeak on any of this stuff, if I get my facts out of line, all you smart folks out there that already have a 928, just correct me, put them in the comments, and correct whatever I say, and we'll take care of it that way. But I've never owned a 928, but I think I'm pretty knowledgeable on them. So basically what happened was back in the early 70s, Porsche thought the 911 was getting a bit long in the tooth. You know, they thought they were pushing the air-cooled rear-engine car kind of to its performance limits and stuff. So they wanted to look for an alternative or maybe even a replacement. So in the mid-70s, they looked at a bunch of different options: rear engine, mid-engine, front engine. They wanted a car that was a little bit more luxurious, more of a GT car, but still very sporty. And putting the engine up front just made the most sense because you can get more people in the car, more room in the car. Now, not that the 928 was ever really a four-seater. It's a 2+2, but unless you got munchkins, little kids, they can throw in the back seat. The back seats really aren't very useful. But in any case, when they started to develop the 928, they kind of just concluded, well, you know, the fuel crisis and emissions and all that stuff maybe wasn't quite as bad as they thought it was going to be in the mid-70s. They kind of weathered the storm. The misery index, they kind of got through that. And so they said, well, maybe there's a little bit more life left to this 911 stuff. And as you know, in the mid-70s and 75, they started coming out with the 911 turbo. So it kind of started to gain a second life with that car. So the R&D and development of the 928 basically became, instead of a replacement for the 911, a side-by-side alternative to the 911. And it was a great car. I mean, I think it came out in 77 at Geneva, and first model year was 78, and it was built through 95. The GTS is in 95. So a pretty long production run, even for Porsche standards. You know, 78 to 95, that's what, 17, 18 years. That's a long time for any car. Now, it doesn't seem that long when you compare it to the 911, which they've been building for, you know, half a century, but for most any other car, that's a long, you know, that's a lot of longevity there. That's a long lifespan. And the interesting thing about it is they really didn't build that many of them. It was always kind of a niche car for Porsche. And in the mid-'80s, you really had three options. You had the 944, the 911, and the 928. That was their stable for probably 15, 20 years, you know, those three cars. So you had your pick of the litter. You had your sort of entry level, perfectly balanced, lightweight sports car. You had your rear engine, nostalgia car. Then you had your sort of businessman special, super fast, long distance, traverse the continent GT cruiser car. So there was a car for everybody, really. So in 78, the car came out, and I think it came out with like 219 horsepower, 220, something like that. And I'm quoting like US specs here. The European specs are different, obviously. And in most cases, they probably had better specs because they're not dealing with the EPA Nazis here and all that other stuff. But the original cars, I think, were 4.5 liters, a little bit over 200 horsepower. And you could get a manual, you could get like a 3-speed automatic. And then in the early 80s, they had the 928S. And at least in the States, that came through 86, I believe, 86 and a half. And then for 87, you had the 928S4, which was a huge redesign. And then that went from like 87 to 91. And you got, again, more horsepower. The engine got up to 5 liters. I think now you're pushing over 300 horsepower. And then you had a 928 GT, which was sort of just a little bit of a more lightweight S4 with a manual. Didn't build many of those. And then obviously the coup de grace at the end, the 928 GTS, which was from 92 or 93 to 95, depending on what your market was. And that was 345 horsepower, 5.4 liters, I think. Just an unbelievable car, but also an unbelievably expensive car by the time they got done with it. I've seen window stickers on originals that were pushing $100,000 or more on a GTS. So that's kind of just the quick genesis from start to finish on the 928. So I thought I'd just kind of walk you through and just talk about some of the things going on with the 928 that I think are going to be advantageous for you to look at and maybe add it to your car portfolio. Let's look at just production numbers first of all. And I threw a graph on the screen here, and you'll see it too. Here's kind of the production numbers for all 928s. They built about 60,000 or so, 61,000. This is worldwide, so the number of cars that came to the US, I'm guessing probably half that, so maybe 30,000 or so. So if we start at the top and work our way clockwise, start at 12 o'clock, see they built about 17,000 928s from 78 to 82, and that was really the original model. Didn't have the spoilers or anything like that on it. It had the original front and rear bumpers. Then they went to the 928 and 80 to 86, depending on what your market was. They built about 22,500 of those. And they had an engine upgrade, a little bit more power, a few refinements. I think they went to a 4-speed automatic as well in the 928S at some point. And then in 87, they went to the 928S4. And that, to me, is really when the 928 got good. They completely redesigned the front and rear bumpers, so they were kind of molded and integrated. They were much more graceful, I guess is a good word. You got a lot more power. You're up well over 300 horsepower now. So really the car had the kind of power that it probably deserved from the very beginning. And then also thrown in there was the 928 GT, of course. And then you had the 928 GTS, which they built about 3,000 or so. But again, these are worldwide production numbers. I mean, I know for a fact that they didn't import 2,000 928 GTs to the U.S. market. I think there is maybe a few hundred at most, maybe 300 or 400 of those. Those are as hard to find as hen's teeth. And the 928 GTS, I don't think they even came close to bringing that many into the States either at 2,900. In fact, I think by 94, 95, they were selling, the 928s were just a hard sell on dealer lots. By 95, I bet they sold less than 100 in the US. Think about that. You've got a production car sitting alongside the 968 and the 911, and you sell less than 100 of them. I mean, you've got to, cover the cost of tooling and manufacturing and parts and all that stuff to prepare to build this stuff in your manufacturing plant back in Germany. and you sell less than 100 in the States, you got to think they were losing money on that car big time by 1995. So, not a lot of people were buying it. Again, it was because the price of the car just ballooned so much by then. It was approaching $100,000. And the 968 had the same problem too. It was approaching $50,000, $60,000. Prices really got out of whack in the mid 90s. So really the best buy in the mid 90s was probably a RS America, to be quite honest. But now, those prices are crazy too. So hindsight's 2020. But in any case, okay, so we're dealing with probably 60,000 cars or so worldwide, 30K in the States. That's not a lot of cars. It's really not that many. I mean, you look at the E46 M3, which, we talk about all the time here. They built 46,000 of those just from 01 to 06. So, and those were in the States, I think. So, this is less than that by a wide margin. So, not many 928s out there. You don't see them that often. I mean, if you go to car shows like I do and Porsche events and all that, they're a dime a dozen. You think everybody has one in their garage, but really that's not the case. You go out just for a drive around your neighborhood or something, you hardly ever see a 928. And that's a good thing, because if you want to put your money into a car, you want something that not everybody else has. Supply and demand. It's really simple. So the important thing to consider here in this map of just the 928 Genesis that we've talked about here is I want to steer this conversation towards the 87 plus cars, okay? This is the 928 S4 on. And the reason for that is, again, it got the much better revised bumpers. It got the huge increase in horsepower. It went from originally the car was 219, then it went to 230 something, then 280 in the late 86 models, I think, for the S. And then it went to 320 or something like that, and 5.4 liters. 5 or 5.4 liters for the S4. It's just a much better car, much more robust. And it's got 15 years behind it of all the mistakes they made manufacturing the 928. So they've kind of worked a lot of the kinks out by then. And a lot of the things have been improved and reinforced and all that good stuff. So I really like the 928 S4. Now you're going to pay more for a 928 S4 over a 928S because they build a lot more 928Ss and 928s. If you want a really early car, really low mileage garage queen early car, even pre-spoiler, rear spoiler car from the late 70s, you're going to pay a huge amount of money because it's a really early car. But let's just focus on the S4, and we'll also talk a little bit about the 928 GT. It's really an S4 with a few bits taken off in a manual tranny. And then the 928 GTS, which is kind of an outlier because they built so few of them. It's got more power. It's got even wider hips and a different revised bumper in the back with that, the long width rear kind of third lit taillight sort of thing in the back. And the prices for the GTSs are they're starting to get really, really pricey, like double or triple even S4s. So we'll kind of just stick to the S4. So let's just kind of look, just to give you a gauge of give you some scale and context to the 928. Let's discuss how it compared to the other cars back in 87. 87 was the first year model of the S4. So let's compare it to the other models that Porsche was selling at the time. And let's see if there's any performance value there. Well, if you look at 0 to 60 times, and this is for manual tranny, transmission 928 S4s. And by the way, manuals, they probably built 10 to 15% of all 928s were manuals. They were automatics, okay? Standard was automatic. You could get the 5-speed manual transmission as a no-cost option. But if you didn't specify it, you're going to get the automatic. And again, they went from 3-speed to 4-speed automatics, I think around 83 or something like that. But in any case, here, you look at the 944 turbo. I had one of those. I had an 86. 0 to 60 in 6.1 seconds. And I think that's even a little low. Those cars are quick. But let's assume that these numbers are correct. And I got all these numbers from the 87 Porsche fact book that dealer salesmen were carrying in their breast pockets. So this is all Porsche information. 944 turbo, 6.1 seconds. 911 turbo. Well, no, it's actually over there on the other side of the garage. Mine's an 88, but it's the same car. 5.5 seconds. and then the 928 S4 5.7. So, I mean, it's right there. I mean, you think of the 911 Turbo as sort of the really first Porsche kind of mainstream, everyday production, mass production supercar that they had. The S4 is right there. It's right in line performance-wise from 0 to 60. And same with top speed. The 944 Turbo, 152 top speed, the 911 Turbo, 157, and the S4, 165. So it tops out all of them. I think that the automatic tops out at 161 or 162 for the S4. So it's still in the lead, even with an automatic transmission. And I think part of the reason it's a little bit quicker is probably from aero. The drag coefficient is probably a little bit less than a 911 Turbo, which is kind of like a brick going through the air. So from a performance standpoint, anybody that tries to talk their ass out of saying the 928 S4 and above weren't great performance cars are just, they're telling lies. The stats don't, the stats don't lie. It was right there. In fact, in 87, I think, they took an S4 out to Bonneville and they set a world land speed record for the fastest normally aspirate. Let's try that again. The fastest normally aspirated production car in the world. I think it did like 170 or 171 on the salt. So it was a big time car back then. I mean, this was a big deal. So you weren't compromising really anything really if you decided to walk into a showroom and take the S4 over a Turbo or a 944 Turbo. And in a lot of ways, it speaks to just how great the 944 Turbo was, because it was like half or a third the price of these other cars, and it was almost as good from a performance standpoint. So I may do a video on the 944 Turbo as well. Let's look at the next slide here. Let's see how this sort of compares to where the market is right now if we compare these same three cars, okay? And this is going to give you an indication of kind of where the valuations are and which cars have sort of already exceeded the market and have already sort of seen their gains or are too late to get in, and which cars still have time to gain, and this is the time to get into them. So if you look at the 944 Turbo, again, these are Porsche Factbook numbers in 87. It's stickered for $34,915. The 911 Turbo is stickered for $61,750, and the S4 for $61,970. So right now, the 944 Turbo, if you go out and try to buy one, and these prices are they're moving up too, but I did a quick search on eBay and the back end of Panorama and a few other magazines and stuff. For about $17,500, you can get a fairly decent 944 Turbo. I mean, I sold mine 5 or 6 years ago for $14,500, and it had 65,000 miles on it, I think, and it was terrific. So I think you can still find some pretty good ones for about $17,500, but the prices are going up. But if you look at the graph, what you can pay for the 944 Turbo now is still about half of what it cost when it was new, okay? So it's not even close to reaching that breaking point, that intersection of where the valuation has come back to hit its original MSRP, okay? Now, if you look at the 911 Turbo, in 87, it sold for $61,750. Well, there's no way you're gonna get a 911 Turbo for that much anymore. 10 years ago, you could get one for $40. Now, you're looking at least $125. Mine's insured for more than that, but that's really your starting point to get a decent one. So now the 911 Turbo has exceeded its MSRP intersection by twofold. So you're way too late if you want to get into a 911 Turbo. I mean, if you got stupid money and you got money burning a hole in your wallet, you don't know what to do with it, more power to you. Go out and buy whatever you want. But if you're like me and you've got a limited income and you're trying to stretch your dollar as far as you can, you want to stay away from 911 Turbos and park your money elsewhere. So now we go to the 928 S4, a car that sold for almost the exact same price. Now, think about this. Remember, scale and context here. It sold for almost the exact same price as the 911 Turbo. It has almost the exact same performance as the 911 Turbo. But right now, its valuation is half of what the original MSRP is. And compared to the 911 Turbo, it's about a quarter the price of what it is to get basically the same performance car and the same value of the original car out of the 911 Turbo that you get. So you can spend 125 to 150 on a 911 Turbo and pull those same performance numbers. You can get an S4 and do it for 4 or 5 times less. Now, I understand the 911 Turbo, it's sort of the quintessential 911. It's air-cooled, rear engine. It's got the big hips. I get all that, okay? It's not completely apples to apples. But what I'm saying is the 928 S4 is severely undervalued right now in the market. And at $30,000, that's even up from what it was just a couple of years ago. So it was the delta between those two was even greater just a couple of years ago. So just something to keep in mind. If you're looking for cars to get into, you want cars that were expensive at one time, cheap now, but will at some point recover their value and go back up. So you want to buy at the low end. And right now the S4s are at the low end. Everybody's still into the air-cooled craze. They're buying up 911s and 964s and 993s. Those are the hot cars. Carrera 4s, C4Ss, 964 turbos, 930, all that stuff. That's what everybody wants. That's what's driving the price up. Nobody's really paying a whole lot of attention to the 928s. Kind of like they're not paying a whole lot of attention to the 944s. Those are the cars you want to get into. And that's kind of the reason I got into the M3, the E46, is it was just old enough to be kind of, out of everybody's mind, but still new enough where you can get into it where the valuation was pretty much bottomed out. So that's when you want to get into it. So now let's kind of just look at the overall valuation market trend of an 87 S4 over the last 10 years or so. And this is really going to kind of illustrate my entire point here and just encapsulate everything. If you look at the graph here, back in 06, September of 06, the valuation was about $15,000, okay? And really, from 06 to about the middle of 2014, it kind of held steady. There really wasn't a whole lot going on. It went from 15 up to about $20,000, $21,000 or so. But for the most part, once it went up in 07, it pretty much held its ground for the next 8 years or so, which means nobody was really paying attention to it. But at the same time, what it also means is for 8 years, it completely leveled out in terms of its depreciation, okay? Which should be an indication to you that it's done depreciating, okay? It's over with. If it can hold its level for that long, then it's done. It's never going down again, okay? Now, it may or may not be worth more than that at some point, but if you get into it at that price, when you ever need to get out of it, it's still gonna be worth that price. So now you can see, once you got into the end of 2013 and into 2014, it started to creep up a little bit, okay? It went from 21,000 to 22. And if you see in the middle of 2014, that's when it started ramping up, okay? So just, if you look at sort of the blue area that I've highlighted here, and this is really sort of the big indicator here that times are a-changing with the 928. In the last 2 years, from the middle of 2014, May 2014, to the current September, at least September 2016, it's gone from 22,900 to 31,100. So it's gained over $8,000 of appreciation just in the last 2 years. So in the last 2 years, it's gained more than it did in the last 8 years, the 8 years prior to that. In fact, it gained almost twice as much. Not quite, but it's definitely picking up steam. And to me, this is a great indicator that, okay, things were flatlined, it hit rock bottom, it stayed there, the market wasn't going anywhere. Okay, something has now changed. Now the valuations are starting to go up. Now, in a perfect world, you would have got into this car in 2013, and now you'd be $8,000 richer. But that would be total speculation because it had already flatline for 6 years. You don't know if it's going to flatline for another year, another 6 months, or another 20 years. You just don't know. So that is huge speculation. It's not so much speculation at this point because we've got a piece of the graph here that's telling us things are already going up. So right now, a good 928, this is mid-mileage, S4, 87, 30,000 is probably going to get you a decent one. In fact, I think I put in a prior video, a red one I was looking at that had like 30,000 miles on it. It sold for and it was a cherry. It was a garage queen. Oh, I should have bought that car. Hindsight, but I think that car ended up selling for like 28 or something like that. So 30, I think you can get a really good one. And again, even at 30, you're still less than half of what the original base MSRP was, which was $61,000. So you have got a long way, excuse me, you've got a long way to still gain some valuation in that asset, okay? It's not like it's done moving up. It's got a long way to go. I mean, remember the 930, they were $30,000 just a few years ago on a $60,000 car. Now they're $125, $140 on a $60,000 car originally. Now, I don't know if an 87 928 S4 in 5 or 7 years is going to be worth $125,000 too. But I can sure as hell tell you it's not going to be worth 30. It's going to be worth more than 30. So you want to get into this car now. And I think the last 2 years, I think is enough of an indicator to be fairly comfortable putting your money into this car and feeling like you've got something that you can put some equity into. Now, if like anything, if you want to buy a 928, you want to kind of stretch and buy the nicest one you can afford. You don't want to buy a fixer-up or anything like that. That's never been, the way I've done it. I've never had luck doing that. If you can do that and that's your thing, then you might be able to even undercut the pricing even more. But if you find a good one, get one that's well cared for, taken care of, receipts, maintenance records, and all that stuff. And on a 928, you're probably going to want that. I mean, like most Porsches back in the 80s, they were still, to a large extent, hand-built, which is a good thing. They were built like vaults. But the 928s had some electrical gremlins and a few other things. So you need to be aware of that. You're going to have to put some money into it as things deteriorate or need replaced or break or wear out and all that good stuff. Now, these prices are for automatics, okay? If you want to buy a 5-speed, you're going to pay a pretty hefty premium. I'm guessing you're going to pay 15 to 20% above these prices for a 5-speed. Like I said, there's probably only 10 or 15%, yeah, that were 5-speeds. Not many of them out there, okay? So if you're waiting for one, it's kind of like waiting for a Phoenix Yellow M3. You're going to have to wait it out and find the perfect one for you. But I would not dissuade you from buying the automatic just because so many of them were built with automatics. It's almost ubiquitous to the 928 that it comes with an automatic. So when you show somebody a 928 and it's got an automatic in it, they don't really question it. It's like, well, of course, it's pretty much, it was a standard thing unless you opted out and got the no-cost 5-speed, but hardly anybody did that. So nobody is expecting your 928 to be a 5-speed if you don't say anything about it. So, and I think it kind of suits the car okay too. The transmission was, I think they cherry-picked it from Mercedes. And it got to be a 4-speed late in the model cycle and stuff, so I think it'll be okay there. And if you want to stretch for a 928 GT, those will be hard to find, but you'll pay a bit more premium for them because those are all 5-speeds. And then again, the GTS, you're not going to get yourself into a GTS for 30. You're probably going to have to pay 60 or more for a GTS, a decent one. I mean, there's not that many to be had at all anyways. So the ones that are on the market at any one time aren't that many, but you're going to have to throw out some coin to get a GTS. Now, I think the GTSs have a really good chance of appreciating as well. So, a GTS, probably $90,000, $100,000 back then. If you can get one for 60 or 70 now, I think you're still okay. And I think those cars will end up being worth more than the S4s and the S's. Those might be worth 150 down the road, 175, in another 10 or 15 years. And it's just a great car. but not everybody has 60 or 70 to get into a car. So, okay, my video cut out on me. It only goes for like 30 minutes or something. But in any case, we've pretty much covered everything. 928, it's a really good car to get into now. Get into it now before it's too late. The prices are low, they depreciate, they're starting to go up, but you still got a whole bunch of appreciation to get into. And I think you're gonna do really well with it. So if you like this video, like it. You know, we've done other videos like this. We did an FJ Cruiser video. If you like these kind of videos, I'll be happy to do more of them. I got a few other cars I'd like to do as well. So if you like this video, again, like it. If you didn't like it, don't like it. You can follow me on Instagram and Twitter at ChrisWorldTV. And like I tell you, if you're new to the channel, you haven't subscribed, subscribe today so you never miss an episode. Take care.